Welcome back. Good to see everyone. This Sunday's sermon actually fits in well, I think, to geography and how God works through the gift, the general revelation of nature and geography and the land that we are a part of. And I think we happen to live in a pretty nice place in the world. It's incredibly temperate, and we get seasons, and it's just beautiful and green. Even when it gets a little dry, you know that eventually the rain will come, and we'll get back to what we're used to. The Middle East and Israel was also a home to quite a few people, and we're going to get to watch some videos tonight that talk about roads and trails. Calling them roads, as you'll hear, is a little generous, but roads and paths, and how do people connect to one another and move about. And I think it's one more example of God's general revelation gift to his people, is how do you connect with each other, and how do you build community even if you live in different cities or towns. And then I'll say more after we get to watch the video. The video is very helpful. I was encouraged to realize how much more there is to talk about when it comes to geography.
Nice. Yeah, so the first video sort of tells us about why roads and how they came about and how they became roads and how we can know with some degree of certainty where the roads were in antiquity. So here goes. This is the Our Daily Bread University, Dr. John Beck. Oops, let's do this first.
And with route selection. Route choice was first and foremost influenced by the fact that when people traveled, they walked from place to place to place. By contrast to me, as I travel, they felt every mile that went by. Every foot of elevation change was registered in the burning of their thighs, and they got wet as they waded through rivers. That all influenced the route that they chose to use when they went from place to place. And very often topography is going to play a role in that decision-making process. People who walk prefer to walk in broad valleys where little elevation change is registered in their thighs. That's the number one route choice. When you can't find a valley to walk, you look for a mountain ridge to follow, because on that mountain ridge, you're going to minimize elevation change. When you have to cross over a mountain range, you're going to look for either a mountain pass or a high plateau, which would minimize the crossing elevation in that mountainous terrain. And as you moved up towards that plateau or pass, you are going to look for the most gradual slope that's going to take you up and then back down again as you move through that mountain range. Now, as people walk from place to place to place, their first choice, of course, would be a direct route. It's shorter. But almost always, a longer route was selected in favor of some of the topographical preferences we just listed, but also in order to circumnavigate natural obstacles. Lakes, flooding rivers, high mountain peaks were all avoided. Routes were chosen to improve water availability. Remember, one of the big travel risks was dehydration. And travel routes were chosen in order to connect with villages which could provide resources and overnight safety. Routes were chosen based on these preferences, and because these preferences almost never occurred along the shortest line between places, routes between places were often quite curvy and circuitous. Because these preferences, furthermore, operated for millennia, people walked the same routes wearing pathways into the landscape, and these became the ancient road systems. It is these preferences which created the pathways that became the roads of Bible times. Now, routes in and through the Promised Land also means we need to look at what roads were like what were these pathways/roads like? And when we're done in the next few minutes, I suspect you're going to see the inadequacy of the word road to describe these rather primitive pathways through the ancient world. When you think about roads in Bible times, don't think about hard surface roadways and highways and freeways. Think rustic hiking trail or footpath. That was a road in Bible times. If they were improved, it was getting rocks out of the way that you might otherwise trip over. It was cutting back the brush and the thorns, and it was repairing winter rainstorm damage where washouts might occur on the road system. Look at Isaiah 40, verses 3 through 4. In this language, the inspired author of Scripture is talking about roadway improvements, and really the ideal road is in view here. In the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley, lifted up. Every mountain, brought low. The rough ground shall become level, the rugged places a plain. Oh, to have a road like that. But that ideal road is far from the...
This is, back up to the, if you can. I don't know.
The scripture?
Yeah, to the scripture.
Yep.
And again, parenthetically, this struck me just because of the Handel's Messiah and the fact that Handel put music to these words. And not only did he put music to these words, he applied the description, the English description of each of those words to the musical chords that he put in. So when he says, make straight, then the music is kind of generally flat. And then every valley shall be raised up, and the music goes up. And every mountain and hill made low, and it goes low. And then the rough ground, and it's a lot of up and down in terms of singing, will become level. And then it's just a nice, and so the next time you hear this music, you get to enjoy this passage, but then also the way the music fits the words, and it's just kind of fun to see even geography can come alive in music. So.
And crooked and straight, too.
Yes, yeah, very crooked, straight. Yes, that's the line especially that struck me, so, thank you.
Become level, the rugged... But that ideal road is far from the reality of most local internal roads, which look like this. Just a simple, rustic footpath worn into the land by generation after generation of people who walked the same road between two places. International highways, if you want to use that term, were simply and nothing more than widened footpaths. That's what roads were like in the ancient world. Routes in and through the Promised Land also takes us to the topic of location and labels of key roadways. You know, we don't have a map from the ancient world that has all of these roads inscribed on them, but we can make a pretty good guess at where road systems went. If we know that people traveled between two locations like Jerusalem and Jericho from an ancient document, we can pretty well determine where those road systems would have gone in a number of different ways. First of all, we know because we know how people traveled in the ancient world. Because routes were chosen based on the preference of those who walked, and because the topography has remained largely unchanged, we can determine the most logical route a walker would have used when walking between two known locations. We can put a road on a Bible map simply by knowing something about how people walked as they traveled in the ancient world. Secondly, because roads tended to follow the same contours of the land through all historical periods. Remember that the same realities of walking were informing the decision-making process. That meant roads were going in the same place, generation after generation, century after century. Because of that, if we have evidence from a later time period, we can use that later evidence to inform us on the location of where a road might bend, and in earlier period, even if we don't have evidence that directly links to that earlier period. Evidence from a later period can be used to inform us on the location of a road in an earlier period. One of the best pieces of evidence we have in the Promised Land is evidence left behind by the Romans. Most of this evidence comes from later than the Gospel era, and nevertheless, those data points help inform where roads would have gone earlier. Now, the Romans were interested in controlling a vast empire, and in order to make sure that they could control it all and collect taxes throughout their empire, they put time and energy into a road system that allowed for easy transportation and the quick deployment of their military. And so, toward that end, they would improve roads and they would mark them. They would improve the road beds, they would put up stone markers, and those stone markers are called milestones. About 450 of those later period Roman milestones have survived in Israel alone. In this picture we see examples of both Roman road marker and one of those improved Roman roads. Roman milestones were circular stone columns about 5 feet in height, and they were located about every 1,000 paces along the improved Roman road. You can see that it's cobbled, you can see that there are curbstones, a far cry from the simple footpaths you saw earlier. Now, although these are later than the Bible times era, they nevertheless inform us where roads likely would have gone in Bible times as well. And that allows us to put some of these important road systems on our Bible maps. And I've picked out 4 of them here that I'd like you to learn just a little bit more about. They are...
Now I want to switch to the other video, which I think does a little better job, but they cover basically these 4 same roads, and you know where these 4 major roads would be because you were here last week where we covered the 4 major longitudinal zones, okay?
That's right.
And like Eric stopped this video, I wanted to maybe try to stop this next video a couple places. The International Highway, Kings Highway, Ridge Road, and Jericho Ridge Road.
We know where Ridge Road is.
You know where what?
Ridge Road is.
Right out here, not too far.
Oh no. Man, you're quick. You're in the
That was Susan.
you're in the running for the prize.
In our last video, we learned about the 4 major geographical zones of the land of the Bible: the coastal plain, the hill country, the Rift Valley, and the Transjordan Plateau. Now we will see how each of these regions has a major route that runs through it. Knowing the major routes of the land is important because towns and cities are often located along the routes. The Bible records hundreds of events that happen to people at real locations along these routes. Using map 116, we will mark out 4 major routes. First is the coastal highway, sometimes called the Way of the Sea, which more or less runs unimpeded along the relatively flat coastal plain. The coastal highway is a major section on the international route that joins Egypt to Mesopotamia. However, note Mount Carmel, which is a barrier to travel. Later, we will see how the route traverses Mount Carmel through a pass to the Jezreel Valley, then to the Sea of Galilee, and further north. The second route travels north-south on the watershed of the hill country. This route is called the Road of the Patriarchs because Abraham, Jacob, and Joseph frequently traveled on it. The third route is the Rift Valley. The flat plain provides convenient travel between the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee, and further beyond to the north. The fourth route runs north-south along the Transjordan Plateau. The route is called the King's Highway. Further to the north, the Bible calls the route the way to Bashan. The route continues beyond Bashan to Damascus. Let's see these same routes on map 1-2, where they appear finely highlighted in yellow already. Here is the International Coastal Highway, smooth sailing until Mount Carmel. Then the route uses a valley pass that runs through Mount Carmel and into the Jezreel Valley. Note the city of Megiddo, which functions as a sentinel guarding the pass through Mount Carmel. Megiddo, a city mentioned in both the Old and New Testaments, draws its historical significance from the layout of the regions and the routes. From the Jezreel Valley, the route continues down toward the Sea of Galilee and further north off the map. This route, in all of its sections, is known as the Great International Route that connects Egypt and Mesopotamia. The Road of the Patriarchs does not appear in yellow on map 1-2, since it is more of a local route. However, you can trace it. Remember, it follows the watershed in the hill country. From Beersheba in the south, follow it past the cities of Hebron, Bethlehem, Jerusalem, Bethel, Shiloh, and Shechem. Then it descends into the Jezreel Valley, where it joins the international route. The Rift Valley route connects the Dead Sea to the Sea of Galilee. We've marked it out on the east side of the Rift Valley along the foot of Gilead. Finally, the King's Highway comes through Moab, along the plateau, past Rabat Ammon and Gilead, north through Bashan, and off the map toward Damascus. Using map 115, let's take a closer look at why the Jezreel Valley is a hub for routes. Note that this map is east-oriented, north is to the left. The Jezreel Valley is a wide, flat, triangular, or arrowhead-shaped plain that breaks the hill country. It is a hub of routes, since it is the easiest place to cross east-west through the land of the Bible. We've already seen how the Great International Route comes along the coastal plain, and then utilizes the Jezreel Valley, avoiding the high hill country as it makes its way northeast. Note likewise how traffic crossing east-west, joining both the Rift Valley route and the King's Highway with the Mediterranean Sea, also avoids high hill country by passing through the Jezreel Valley. As the most convenient east-west crossing in the land of the Bible, the Jezreel Valley is an intersection of international routes. There are many biblical events that occurred in the Jezreel Valley because it is the #1 way to cross east-west through the country. Here is the wide Jezreel Valley, looking from Mount Carmel as far as Gilead in Transjordan, and the ruins of ancient Megiddo overlooking the Jezreel Valley. Across the valley are the Nazareth Ridge, Mount Tabor, and the Hill of Moreh.
Okay, so you got this?
No, go ahead.
So, can you flip it around in your head? Here's Megiddo, so the Megiddo Pass will be coming on this side, across the Jezreel Valley. Nazareth is over here, the Sea of Galilee is on the other side. And Mount Tabor, Deborah and Barak marshaled the Israelite army there, I remember. And the Hill of Moreh, this, if you remember, if you were here for the first week, this was one of those things about reading the Bible geographically that he pointed out. On this hill was Shunem, I guess, and on the other side of the hill was Nain. And maybe I'll read that in a bit, but, so that's that.
And
Go ahead.
wasn't Megiddo the capital of Samaria at one point?
I don't think so, but I could be wrong.
Okay.
It is mentioned in the Old Testament
Yeah.
and then also in
I
Revelation.
think it's also Jezreel?
Jezreel?
Yes, Jezreel. Anyway,
The
I think
name?
it is. Yeah, I think the name for it is Jezreel.
Okay.
And this is where driving like Jehu
Mm.
came about. So Jehu was anointed. He was anointed actually in, when was it? In Ramoth Gilead. And then he was immediately told to go to Jezreel and take out the current king and queen. And so he would have driven somewhere through this area, and from Megiddo they could watch him coming. And the account of 2 Kings chapter 9 is kind of both comical and fatalistic as they watched him come and they realized he was coming for them. So anyway, but you can see the vantage point that this would give you as you could watch someone come towards you for many, many, many miles.
As in biblical times, the modern highway comes through the Megiddo Pass into the Jezreel Valley. There are other east-west passages through the hill country, but none are as convenient as the Jezreel Valley. Note on this cross-section sketch how difficult it is to travel from the Mediterranean Sea to Transjordan through the hill country near Jerusalem. Leaving the coastal plain, one ascends nearly 3,000 feet to the hill country watershed, and then descends over 4,000 feet into the Rift Valley. The ascent to Transjordan is another 4,000-foot climb.
All right. extra credit, can anyone tell me what this little foothill is called? A shvela, or something like that, shvela. Okay, but what I appreciated so much in the first video was he said that every foot of incline was felt burning in the calves and the thighs, okay? Look at that, woo! Okay, he's gonna contrast that.
To the Jezreel Valley involves a relatively flat journey and ascent of a little over 200 feet.
Hey, I'm standing here on a ridge in the city of Nazareth.
Climb. In comparison, traveling west to east via the Jezreel Valley involves a relatively flat journey and ascent of a little over 200 feet.
Hey, I'm standing here on a ridge in the city of Nazareth, and behind me is the Jezreel Valley. To my right, you can see Mount Tabor, where Deborah and Barak gathered 10,000 Israelites to go to battle against the Canaanites. And then to my left, you can see Mount Moreh, where on the slope is the city of Nain. And just after Jesus announced that he had the authority to raise the dead, he raised a widow's son from in that city.
Okay, so let's go back to our map, and then Eric can take it from there. Any discussion, but let's see. So, Nazareth, okay, let's get bearings again. Megiddo Pass, right here, there's Megiddo. And so we were looking for Mount Carmel across the Jezreel Valley. The young lady was in Nazareth looking across to Mount Tabor. No, Tabor's not listed. This is Moreh, and this is Gilboa, right? Okay. So Moreh, again, Jesus raised a widow's son in the village of Nain. On the other slope of this, Elisha in 2 Kings 4 raised a widow's son and gave him back to the mother. So the language is kind of the same. And the people of Shunem said, or the people of Nain, when Jesus was there, said, surely a prophet has come to us. Because they knew this is where Elisha had raised the widow's son before. We miss that when we read through the Bible. But when we read it chronologically in the same place, it really pops. I kind of mucked that up, but hopefully you followed that. So, and quiz time. Can you see the road of the patriarchs here? What two indicators give us the road of the patriarchs? Do you remember what they were saying? Well, yeah, Jerusalem. The roads often connected villages. So see this line here? And there's many more that I didn't list, okay, or I didn't add. And it also said that it followed the watershed of the Judean hill country. So you can kind of see the watershed as you go down. So those are two indicators.
One of the things that struck me as I was preparing for this was just the way that God has created this land, and the fact that in some weird, interesting way, the paths are actually quite democratic. They're not imposed by a power other than God. They can be controlled, and certainly civilizations and empires borrow them and impose taxes and make sure that their people get to use it first. But in terms of the actual selection of how do you get from here to there, it's kind of a group decision of how we do that. And it's kind of in the lay of the land. And in some weird way, not completely, I also see almost the gift of the Bible being oddly similar, in the sense that as much as people have tried to control it, at the end of the day, it seems to have a life of its own, because I think it's ultimately, even the gift of the Bible is controlled by God. And so the gift of the land is also given by God. And so as much as denominations or religions try to control it, it keeps coming back and it keeps reinforcing the words of Paul, the words of the apostles, and even the Old Testament is kind of validated because it's quoted so often in the New Testament. And often the canon of the Old Testament is defined by, was it referenced, was it mentioned, was it quoted in the New Testament? And so no matter how many civilizations try to impose or control, it just can't quite seem to tighten up its grip on everything that it wants to. And the same is true here. Civilizations get to borrow the land, but at the end of the day, people get to choose the path that they follow to get from one place to another and connect each other. And so for whatever reason, that struck me as I was thinking about what I heard on the videos. What are some observations that either you've had based on what you've heard or you're doing independent watching and studying that has struck you as you heard some of the descriptions tonight?
I think what I heard echoed in the first video we watched about the condition of the roads was that, and you hear this about when people talking about how little Israel and even Jesus mattered, this little out-of-the-way place.
Yes.
You know, it's a tiny, it's like, no, it's the crossroads of civilization. Chariots were invented like thousands of years ago. They wouldn't go on those roads, right? And yet they went up and down, the Assyrians, the Egyptians, the Babylonians. And so they weren't on roads like that. They were on real highways, in which you have a wheeled vehicle. And there's things that, so I think we do have to remember that it oftentimes makes, when you look at this topography, you think, this is northeastern Pennsylvania. And it's not. Not at all. And every empire that ever existed went up and down there, and everyone improved the roads. Right? Everyone made them better. And in many ways, the roads of Jesus' time, he lived at the confluence, tiny little Nazareth was on 4 major highways, which is how Jesus and their family got a job. So, so I think we just have to remember that when you look at the hiking trails, that was locals. That wasn't how you got your crops to market. That's not how armies moved. There were real roads.
The second half of the video, which we didn't see, of the first video we saw, so emphasize the fact that the coastal highway and the King's Highway were definitely international. And those were what the empires used. Those were what made history. Whereas these smaller roads are definitely local roads and much more necessary for the communities who actually live there. And so, yeah, there's definitely a contrast there. And I think I mentioned this before, but just the way that this emphasizes God's humility in choosing a people that in some ways are insignificant, and yet very significant. He keeps putting them in the way of empires. And yeah, I also find it, one of the jokes I made as I was recognizing the fact that the Israelite people, the people of Abraham, were always secondary to the empires that they worked with, but God made sure they were at the right place at the right time to get educated by the empires, or to even educate the empires in some instances. So, they happened to go to Egypt, and they helped Egypt out. And then Egypt has never had that kind of power or control of the world ever since the demise of Joseph and the people that were there. And then it was the rise of the Babylonians. And God sent Daniel right where he needed to be, even to help them. So it's, again, in my mind, it's a matter of God's constant humility in terms of working with the people and trying to let people know that the way through him, to him, is not through power. It is through humble service. Yes?
Well, someone else did too. I always felt and thought this, that, God promised a land of milk and honey. This is not, this is hostile ground. Like, come on, couldn't you have done better? What's some of your thoughts on that? I know what you said about, putting people at the right place at the right time. But it just seems like this is rugged, this is, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it would be rather hard to find grass for sheep. And I mean, they were shepherds, where's the grass?
Well,
I mean,
so this part is definitely more desert. I mean, we're talking, as I think you heard last time, 4 inches of rain for Jericho.
yeah,
Less than 10 inches for Amman, Jordan. But this side is actually quite a bit better. And it's this side that would be able to support sheep and crops. And you saw some of the pictures there
Right.
where, yeah, the Jezreel Valley is incredibly lush.
Right.
Yeah.
And one of the videos, which I will make available to you, especially if you tried to find them and couldn't, so that the northern, like the plains up here, the Sharon Plain, coastal plains, they could support crops, and also the Jordan Valley, I guess. But then this will be more. So this will be your honey part, cultivation, and then this will be your milk part, the goats on the hills and such,
Okay.
the shepherd. So he does address that verse. But your point's still kind of well taken.
I mean, the hills are,
Yeah.
It didn't look like that when they arrived.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you, imagine you let sheep and goats graze without control
Right.
for 10,000 years. That's what Pennsylvania would look like too.
Did you discover anything about the reasons the people moved around? I mean, if you live in a little village along the Patriarch's Highway,
Yes.
why would you go anywhere else?
Yes. Well, the,
because you want to eat.
Yeah.
What strikes me is I always looked at Israel, a hilly country, but not mountainous like the Alps. I mean, these two mountains are what you have in the highest area in the Alps.
Yeah.
I never thought of it that way.
I mean, one reason why you would want to travel and again get to know the land is that there was a call by their own religion to travel to Jerusalem 3 times a year for the festivals. And so it was an excuse for the people to get together and to celebrate the gifts that they've gotten through the year of harvest or the year to come. And so there's plenty of stories in the Bible to talk about that. There's the Psalm of Ascents, which describe the trip and encourage you to think about God as you are headed there. And then the general atmosphere that we get from Mary and Joseph not even caring where Jesus is because it's a family reunion. And it's a good time to trust and go and reconnect.
And if you travel from Nazareth to Jerusalem, how many weeks would that take? Months?
I'm sure it would take,
Well,
yeah, we could,
It's not that far.
yeah.
John Beck talks about from ancient records and such, they traveled fast.
Yeah.
Like they
Relatively
moved quite a
speaking.
bit, and so I'll make those videos available to you where he talks about how far they would go. Like the mail carriers, the postal service, they man, it's amazing. I forget what he said. The average person would walk an average of such and such miles per
Was
day.
it 20?
21 miles or something
Yeah, I was
like
gonna say,
Yeah.
you could probably go 25 miles
Yeah.
a day.
that. And people still walk a lot today, just not us. If you, well, I saw you walking today. I did. Red, you were wearing red.
I was already.
Yep. But people walk for their water today, just not us. So yeah. I was reading Genesis earlier this year, through Genesis with the Bible Atlas in hand, and I was struck. Who asked the question? David did. You know, Abraham moved from here, and then down to Beersheba, and then back up to Bethel. You know, back up to Shechem maybe, down to Egypt. Like they moved quite a bit, and it doesn't really say why. Usually, sometimes it does for famine.
Is there a possibility that they had sheep and they cleared the area
Big
and
farms.
they have to
Yeah.
wait until it grows back?
Yep.
They didn't used to fence in animals.
No, no
Fencing is kind of
offense.
the new thing.
Other questions? These are good questions.
I figured by the key that it was about 100, no, up in the corner, that it was about 120 miles from Nazareth to Bethlehem. Am I right? That's 20, yeah.
Maybe 6 days.
6 days, 20
But
miles?
don't think it's quite that
I
far.
It's
think
not quite that much, right?
there is a passage that says, now Jesus had to go through Samaria, you know, and I think that's a theological statement, not a
Physical?
not a geographical statement.
Right.
Because Jews would often, I think, go to the Jordan River Valley to skirt Samaria and come back to
True,
Jerusalem.
so it might have been faster.
Yeah, but they would make it longer for their own preferences. Sometimes
I couldn't
geographical,
imagine
sometimes
sitting on a donkey pregnant.
sometimes
2 weeks.
theological, right? Yeah, it's interesting, you know, they often didn't take the closest, the shortest distance. They would often go because of features and
Easiest.
elevation,
The easiest,
topography.
true.
All right?
I find it interesting how God guided them to these different places.
Yeah.
And you can see how there was a path there. Going back to what you, some of the stuff that you did, Dan, on Egypt and stuff like that, and taking them out of the promised land, taking them into the, you know, and that, you know, just how there was always a way, there was always an opening, you know, and you just saw, or you just see God's hand in even the design of this, you know, of the topographical features,
Mhm.
you know, that are here and stuff like that. I just find that fascinating and stuff like that. Even when I look at this and we started going through this stuff, it was like, that makes perfect sense. Okay, how do they get here? That makes perfect sense, you know. Why do they use this for, you know, it's like, it just sort of really stuck out to me that God's intervention in this whole design, you know, and how he has every detail under his eye. And when he says that, he knows the number of hairs on her head, and then you can understand, you know, I mean, it just amazes me. It just makes me more and more, I have a friend who's like, why do we study this kind of stuff, you know? He just doesn't get it, you know? And it's like, because the more you study it, the more you realize God's intervention in this world and his love for us and just how everything was planned, you know?
I still like that parking space metaphor. God chose a particular parking space when Jesus came to this area. Makes me love this area, and want to learn it the best I can.
It's a quick look, and from Jerusalem back to Nazareth was about 85 or 90 miles. And
As the
so,
crow flies,
yeah, it might be actually a little
or by road.
by road.
Yeah.
And so if you say 20 or 25 miles a day, it would take about 5 days.
But maybe not pregnant. All right, should we get to some, should we let Susan try to earn the rest of her prize?
Why, what?
Would anyone know their blue ones tonight? Would anyone like to try to do Vanna White tonight? We could do it group-wise. Susan, you win the prize. I chose this prize. Eric spurred me on. Because we're talking about roads and routes today, I went with the car theme. And I chose the aroma of True North, because we're talking geography. So, there you go.
If you win that day, you have to start smoking.
Okay, so Beersheba, can someone tell me where it is? Beersheba. Beersheba.
Is that way down south by 34?
Way down.
Yep, way down, that's right. Yep, so in the Negev, in the region of the Negev. The dry basin, Negev, Beersheba. Okay, coastal plain, you guys got that.
To the left.
Yep. 7. Gilead. Gilead.
It's in the middle up, is it 15?
13. Yep.
13.
Yep. Transjordan area, region. Hebron. Ooh, Hebron.
Aha.
Way down near the
Right
Judea
across from the
wilderness.
That's
Dead.
right.
Yeah, there you go.
Yep, 14. Yep.
Yeah.
Hebron. So the patriarchs would have spent time there. Abraham, Jacob, Isaac maybe. Jaffa. Jaffa. Also called Joppa. Also called Haifa, I think. Yep, on the coast. Oh, this is where Tel Aviv is. Tel Aviv might be right above it. The former capital of Israel?
Yes. When Jerusalem was not yet integrated into
Right.
Israel,
Right.
Haifa was the capital.
That's Jonah's job, right? Isn't that where Jonah went out?
Joppa.
Is that where the whale got him?
Oh, so-
So, yeah.
So it goes way back.
Yep. Jericho.
North of the
In the
Dead
Rift
Sea.
Valley.
Yep, that's right. From Jerusalem down to Jericho.
Mm-hmm.
Jezreel Valley? Yeah, the Arrowhead, nice. Which they said tonight was the easiest way to get across from west to east
Yeah.
because of the elevation.
Looked like it still went straight up at the end.
Yeah, well,
That went off the screen.
that might have been up here on Transjordan.
Right, right.
Yeah, okay. Jordan Rift Valley, from Turkey to Kenya. Megiddo, where's Megiddo?
Just on the west side of the valley.
Yep, so the Megiddo Pass is right here, the dark line, and Megiddo sort of guards that. Moab,
Oh, it's down at the very bottom on the right.
yep, down here.
Is that the desert?
Yes, it's like hill, yeah, dry hill,
Okay.
which is interesting. They went there during famine. But it might have been looking different at that time. Mount Nebo, do you remember what that was about? The sickness?
Moses, farewell.
Yep,
Over on the other side.
Moses number 32.
32.
Keep going there, dude, on that ridge.
Yep, so Moses and the children of Israel came up on the east side and looked across.
You can see that view online and like a panoramic photo, and even today it's pretty nice.
Okay. 32. 34, Negev, down here. What's the town down here?
There.
That's in the desert.
Beersheba.
Beersheba. It's in the Negev. Shechem.
Shechem?
Shechem.
Shechem is right above the Jordan Rift Valley to the left.
Mhm.
Sperry Hill Country next to it. above it.
Okay. Sphela. That would be the foothills to the Judean hill country. And we have the four valleys, which is next time, actually. And Tyre would be the last one. Tyre?
Tyre is all the way up to the left.
Tyre and Sidon. All right, so the next time, Mount Moreh. Do you remember where Moreh is? Where Elisha and Jesus healed?
Yes. The boy.
Yep. So it's one of the mountains that makes up the Arrowhead. This is Mount Gilboa. I think I have that in there, 35. Yep. So, okay, so where were we? Mount Moreh, Bashan. The
Bashan.
bulls of Bashan have encircled me, Psalm 22, up here. Yep. Caesarea,
The area is on the coast.
on the coast, yep. And Gaza, down here.
Gaza is all the way down.
Yep, this is Philistine country.
It still is. It still is.
Ula Valley. Ula, I just included this one because it sounds cool. The Ula Valley. I don't know well, this was one of the unconquered territories. The Israelites could not conquer this under Joshua, but it's above the Sea of Galilee. Okay, Hula. The Jabbok River, 16. Right here. I think this is Elijah. Jabbok River. Okay, now the valleys. Ajalon Valley. And one of the satellite Bible Atlas videos takes you on a trip from
Jaffa.
Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and it takes the whole way through here, through the Ajalon Valley and Kiryat Jearim, which we talked about last time, and ends up in Jerusalem. It's a pretty cool video. And then you can see kids playing soccer on the left. Just blows my mind. Okay, Sorek Valley, so Ajalon, Sorek, and Elah Valley. This would be David and Goliath right here, the Elah Valley, the Sorek, and the Ajalon. Down to Mount Gilboa, the other mountain that makes the arrowhead. Saul was buried there, King Saul. Rabbath Ammon, so 36. This would be the Ammonite territory, Ammonites. Rabbath Ammon. And Sharon Plain would be right here. So we have the coastal plain down here, and this is the Sheridan Plain for some reason, not sure why. Is that it? That's it. So if you learn all of those, the red ones, the blue ones, and these last 12, you get the 42.